All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Appreciate you all coming and those that are joining us online. I am Ben Tyndall. I am the executive director for Save Family Farming, and we have a very good conversation this morning that I have really looking forward to being able to present and help kind of moderate. We've got two individuals as we're going to be looking at how do food markets operate and some of the challenges and nuances to understand how that works. We have two individuals that I'll introduce here in just a moment who will be able to hopefully kind of walk us through and have a conversation, break down a little bit about some of the nuances and the challenges around that, and really kind of help someone who is maybe not right in the middle of, who is not a farmer or a rancher, someone who deals or handles this process on a day-to-day basis, might be able to help kind of understand that as a general consumer, kind of such as myself and a lot of the individuals that we interact with at Save Family Farming. So this will be a really good conversation. But before we dive into that, I do want to thank our sponsor that puts on these Ag Exchange conversations each month. We have a big thank you to the Kennewick Irrigation District. They are been a big partner with us for a while now, and really appreciate their support and their leadership in the Central Washington area to really ensure that farmers and producers and individuals in that community have water as well as the resources and that they need to grow the food and that produce it for all of us. So really appreciate Kennewick Irrigation District and their work in the Central Washington area. So with that, I do want to introduce our panel, and we will bring on Dr. Faith Parham. She is an economist originally from Big Springs, Texas, where she was involved in agriculture and 4-H and FFA. She has a bachelor's degree in agricultural economics from Texas A&M University, and received a PhD in agricultural economics from A&M as well. And her research focused on the impact of public policy using machine learning techniques. And so now she is working with the American Farm Bureau Federation, and she has previously worked in U.S. Customs and Border Protection. And really appreciate Dr. Parham being here, as well as Pam Lewison, who is not a stranger to Save Family Farm, working as the research director for the Washington Policy Center for Agriculture. She's also a fourth generation hay farmer, raising hay and teff and other rotational crops and cattle. And she's served as the Washington Cattlemen's Association president, as well as she writes regularly for both obviously the Washington Policy Center, but as well as various other ag publications like Capital Press, as well as publications like the Seattle Times and LA Times. And really appreciate both of you coming out and take part in this conversation. Really appreciate it. What really, I guess, I'd love to just kind of dive right in. What really struck me, or what introduced myself to Dr. Parham here, but was an article that both she, but also Pam wrote a similar article with the Washington Policy Center, really looking at the amount of money, or the amount of money, really I should say almost the number of cents that come back to farmers for every dollar that a consumer pays at the grocery store, and kind of breaking that down. This was a topic that I've really been kind of wanting to work through and understand, because it is such a challenging, nuanced topic that so many factors. They're really I'm not trying to spoil anything, but there really isn't an easy answer to say this is how food markets work. It kind of depends on commodity. It depends on the condition. It depends on national and state issues as well, and international trade issues. But the goal of this really is to kind of hopefully through this conversation shine a little more light and make something very complicated hopefully a little less complicated, or at the very least give people a better understanding of how it is so complicated and not take that for granted. But to you first, I'd love to kind of see, so in your recent article, you reported that really farmers were less than 6 cents for every dollar that's spent at the grocery store. kind of break that down. What does that mean? How is that calculated? Kind of give me an update or a rundown of your reporting, and then I'll punt it over to Pam as well, and to share a little bit from her article. But let me start with you.
Yeah, of course. So the United States Department of Agriculture puts out a report every year called the Food Dollars Series. This is from their Economic Research Service, or ERS. And so each year they look at how much money goes to each part of the supply chain as you move from farm gate to your plate. And so, like we mentioned, on average, about 6% of every dollar, or 6 cents, goes to the farmer when you purchase that. 2.5 of that goes to livestock farmers, or sorry, 2.5 goes to crop farmers, excuse me, and the rest is to livestock. Obviously, this is a pretty simple way to think of this concept. It is just to kind of help the general public wrap their mind around where their dollar goes to, and kind of explain how it doesn't all just go back to that farmer or rancher, but it is a good indication of where in that supply chain the most of that money is going to. So other things in the supply chain can be like transportation expenses. Obviously, when fuel and diesel prices are high, that share will kind of bump up. It could go to labor. So, not even labor on the farm, but labor in the grocery store. All of these different things are little places where that dollar goes to when you go to the grocery store and buy something. And of course, like you mentioned, you're a great economist. It depends. It depends on the commodities. So, commodities that are processed less typically get a higher share of the food dollars. So, egg is the highest. So they get just over almost 70 cents of each dollar, compared to more processed foods like a granola bar, so to speak, because there's a lot more stages to get that granola bar to your house than there is, to take an egg, wash it, carton it, and put it in the grocery store.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, Pam, let me kind of turn to you. You reported on this similar data. Kind of share a little bit from your perspective how you approach that, as well as maybe you being a Washington resident. How does that impact Washington farmers and ranchers?
So I think Dr. Parham's right. The big thing here, I think, is context. You have to look at not just the steps between the farm gate and the dinner plate, but you have to look at some of the regulations and other policies that go into how we look at that food dollar. So in Washington in particular, we have a great deal of regulatory burden that is part of our food supply chain. So when you look at things like labor in particular, a lot of that money is sort of bled out in those additional overhead costs as well. So the profit margin on farm in Washington in particular, I think is significantly smaller than you would see elsewhere.
Okay. Well, you roughly, so if farmers don't receive, they're not even receiving anything close to the majority of the funding, or in this idea of, like, if a individual goes to a grocery store paying, $50 for, a handful of items, we assume farmers must be making a lot of money right now. Food prices are going through the roof. Where is some of that money going? So if you say, okay, farmers are only making 4 to 6 cents, per dollar, that's a lot of money going elsewhere. Can you kind of share a little bit on where's that money going then, to give people a better understanding?
There's a few different areas where it can go. First is food services. That's what the USDA categorizes as, like, the waitress that comes up to you at a restaurant and you order from, that kind of goes there. Food processing, that's, how do we take this wheat from the field and turn it into the bread that you see in the grocery store? And lastly is food retail. So different things to market those products. So a lot of that is where the majority of that is going. But there are also some other things like finance and insurance, transportation, energy cost. So energy cost on farm, but energy cost off farm as well. All of those kind of come in together to, make up the rest of that dollar.
Okay. So let me, Pam, you may share on this. Has that always been the case? Is this been, the process for years and years, or is this a new trend that's kind of shifting? How has the farmer's share always been that small? For, in my head, like, they're the ones that are growing the food, they're the ones that are raising the meat, they're the ones that are putting this work in. Usually I would think, again, they would receive a larger share of this. They have to kind of baby the food and the animals for, months on end, generally, sometimes years, and to receive this kind of small amount. Is this always been the case?
I think you would, historically, I would say, and I'll defer to Dr. Parham's expertise, but I would say that this is the norm. The difference is, we have less farmers now, and we've become more efficient in how we do production agriculture. So, there was about 50, 60 years ago, there were a lot more people who were farming. So things felt different, and it was certainly a lot less expensive to live. So relative to earned income, you were talking about something much different in terms of cost ratio to live versus what you were earning. And now, everything has become more expensive, and that sort of earned income is just not going as far as it once did. I don't know if Dr. Parham can speak to that a little bit better than I can. I would imagine so.
Yeah, so historically, it has still been very low. I would say we're trending lower in recent years. I think one reason we can talk about is just, just like Pam was saying, the cost of everything is kind of going up. And, Americans are feeling it in the grocery store, but farmers and ranchers are feeling it on farm. So production expenses are way more expensive for farmers and ranchers these days. So that's really adding to some of that pressure.
Okay. No, that's actually very helpful, and it's helpful to understand. It's also, I hope for individuals watching this, and myself is very much in. It's very eye-opening to kind of hear this and see that, one, in theory or in practice, I can understand this. But another thing, when you kind of put some numbers and dollar amount to it, you're like, wow, okay, farmers only receive 4 cents for every dollar spent at the grocery store. That's very eye-opening. So let me this now. This kind of gets in almost the main part of what I'm really interested for you to kind of help me understand. But I don't know how many times over the past years I've now worked kind of with agriculture community for 8 years or so, something. And I don't know how many times over and over we hear this phrase, at least here in Washington, between farmers, or hear lawmakers say, farmers are price takers, not price makers. And it's kind of become a bit of a cliche, especially as we see, well, the cost of living is going up, everything is going up. We're in a capitalistic society. If you're selling a product, then, if you need to make more, you need to ask more. So why are farmers price takers? Why can't they set their price and say, well, it costs me a lot more to raise this beef, it costs me a lot more to grow these potatoes, so I'm going to now charge more for selling them, getting them off my farm. Break that down for me. Maybe help me kind of understand a little bit, why are farmers price takers and not price makers? Why can't they set their own price? I'll start with you, Faith, and then but then I'd love Pam's take as well, of course.
Yeah, well, this is a great intro to, economics 101. So there's a few different markets we all exist in, and one of them is called perfect competition. So this is getting really into the weeds and nerdy, but if you think about apples per se, if I harvest all the same type of apples, I'll use Cosmic Crisp because we're talking about Washington. If I harvest all the Cosmic Crisp apples in Washington, they're very hard to differentiate from each other. And so in this perfect competition, you have a lot of goods that are all very similar. And so then when you go to price them, it's a lot harder to compete on price than, say, if you were a company selling a bottle of Coca-Cola that you can differentiate from other products. And so this is why farmers exist in that perfect competition. A good example too is like for our row crops folks, if you think about wheat, one grain of wheat is the same as another grain of wheat as another grain of wheat. So it's really hard to differentiate. And so you start to compete in a global marketplace, or even, in the United States, in a national marketplace in which everybody's goods are very comparable, which means it's very hard for you to say, I'm going to charge more because if your neighbor down the street charges less, people will just buy from your neighbor down the street, which is less. And so that's kind of the econ explanation of why we say farmers are price takers. They're competing in that perfect competition world where every good is the same as everyone else's goods, and it's hard to distinguish and differentiate on price. Some farmers do farmers markets and on-farm stores, things like that. That's a way for them to help differentiate on price. But they're selling another part of that, which is that experience of coming to the farm or the experience of going to the farmer's market.
No, that makes sense. It is. I think I have lived. You live within this kind of capitalist understanding of a reality that, okay, if you're going to start a business, and in my head, well, a farm is just another business, and so even in some ways, this also helps someone who didn't grow up on a farm and kind of is learning this farming mentality to not necessarily, apples to apples, the way the rest of a business, office-based business society works. That's not how farming operates. It is not, a one-for-one here. Pam, let me draw you in. Kind of help me understand a little bit more, that farmers don't get to set these prices. And that's not like I said, it's not a apples to apples here.
I think it is also much like Dr. Parham's discussing, there are differentiations, and I think there's some niche markets you can address. For example, we grow alfalfa and teff along with a mixture of orchard grass and alfalfa. So we have identified a niche market with small bale forage crops. So we, to a certain extent, do get to set our price. People come directly to us, and so we can say, okay, this is how much we're going to charge based on our labor and input costs. However, we still have to be competitive in that wider market. There are other people who sell the same product in the same format who are close to us regionally. So there is this face-to-face interaction that occurs, and we differentiate ourselves with other sort of small offerings, like we'll help you load hay if you come to us, versus maybe somebody else who says, well, this is where it's at, come and get it. So I think those kinds of things are what make you a price maker. But if you look at the commodity side of things, when you're a price taker, you have something that is not particularly unique. And you have to be able to figure out how to compete in that environment. And there isn't much of an option for competition. You are just at the whims of whatever the market is. And oftentimes, the best way to do that is to sell futures, which gets a little bit more in the weeds into what profit and loss looks like and whether or not you want to hedge your bets that way. But it does offer you the opportunity to perhaps make some money at a peak time when you wouldn't otherwise be able to if you're selling later in the year.
Okay. Now that's so okay. And maybe forgive me for being a little dense, but if I'm hearing, that farmers, with some exceptions, they can kind of, through farmers markets or direct sale, things like that. But as a general rule, they don't set their prices. The market sets them. Mm-hmm. So who sets the market prices? What does that, I guess, mean? How are market prices determined? Okay, I guess if farmers aren't setting their prices, who is? Faith, can you maybe kind of take a first stab at that and help me understand how are market prices determined?
Yeah, of course. So that's, supply and demand, right? Like there's not someone out there in the world that's saying, okay, let's use cotton because I'm from West Texas and I have to talk about cotton everywhere I go. No one out there in the world is saying, okay, cotton is 70 cents a pound right now. It's just the market, and all the traders in the market are looking at what they think the supply will be for the year and what they think the demand will be for the year, and trying to decide what that price is going to be. And so, if we have global shortage for whatever reason, let's say someone had really bad weather this year in another country, and there's going to be a whole lot less grains in the market. Well, then those people trading in the market look at that and say, well, we know there's going to be less supply out there, so we're going to have to pay more to get it. And that's what kind of moves that price up. If they're looking at around the world and we're saying everyone's having a great weather year, we're going to have yields off the charts, everyone's going to look good this year, that's going to kind of bring that price down because they know there's going to be more supply in the market than there's actually demand to use it.
Interesting. Okay, well, it actually, so for a lot of the, I guess, non-farming type, we might be a little more familiar with the idea of like a stock market and how that, and really it's called a stock market for a reason. And you're called, in essence, these that are trading in various commodities, they're kind of setting that market price for the farmer. And the farmer is in so many ways kind of beholding to whatever that market price that they're receiving is. Pam, how about yourself? Anything that you could kind of help shine some light on? Okay, how does this market operate? Anything from your perspective?
Well, so I think a great example that's perhaps a little more local is wheat. When the war in Ukraine broke out, that area, the Crimea, is a large producer of wheat. And there was this recognition that wheat from that area of the world was not going to be readily available. And as a result, what we saw was a spike in the price of wheat for quite some time, actually. And it was great for our local wheat producers. We saw, I believe it peaked at right around 8 or 9, maybe $10 a bushel briefly. And so it had been hovering right around $4 a bushel, which is not even break even. So that shift in supply, and a pretty significant shift really in supply, made a big difference for our local wheat growers at that particular time. And it helped them ride out what had been really a pretty depressed market in that particular cereal grain.
Well, that's very helpful. I guess my thoughts are, are there things that farmers, and you kind of mentioned it a little bit with regards to direct sale or farmers markets, things like that. But are there things that farmers can do to help have more of a kind of more pricing power? Are there things that farmers can do to maybe help bring more of that consumer dollar to the farm? These farms that are in many ways, just kind of existing on a knife point, making sure that they can survive. Is there something that farming or agriculture, or even maybe more on a broader scale, that policymakers or legislators, if we want to think a little more broadly, the individuals in our state, be it individuals in leadership or agricultural individuals, can do to help kind of bring some of those extra cents onto the farm? Your thoughts, either one, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's how do we value add to that commodity, right? To differentiate it from other goods. And I used Cosmic Crisp as an example earlier. I'm going to go back to that, right? What are a way we can differentiate an apple from another? Well, that's a way groups can come together and come up with a variety of an apple that is distinguishable. You can get more demand for that. You kind of sell it as that specialty type of apple. Well, other commodities can do similar things. If you're a beef farmer or a rancher, how can you distinguish your beef from other beef on the market? Do you have a special variety of cattle? Different things like that. So there's always ways for farmers and ranchers to kind of that value add that makes it distinguishable from the market. That being said, that also can be kind of expensive in a large project. You might need a whole group to kind of work on that, not just an individual farmer. But again, farmers markets, direct sales, all of these are also great ways to value add. Agritourism, another one. You bring people onto the farm, you let them experience the farming, pick your own cherries, pick your own apples, things like that can also help bring some value add to your products.
Okay. No, well, and that's very helpful. Just kind of having that. You talk about drawing other path, almost more of a co-op or kind of a coalition going on. Pam, how about you? Are there other ideas that you might have as far as ways in which I know you have a handle on some of the policy side as well? Are there things that can be done as far as helping farmers bring some more of that penny onto the farm for every dollar?
I think on the policy side, there's plenty of things that can be done. Federally, I'd love to see a lot less tariffs and just in general. I think that would be really helpful for the ag community as a whole. I'd also love to see a shift on a state level in how we run a lot of our policy around labor. And a lot of the other regulations around agriculture in general, whether it's our water policy, some of our uh, natural resource policy. There's a whole bevy of things that I think could be changed that would in turn save farmers a lot of money and potentially increase that profit margin pretty significantly.
Okay. Well, so this kind of draws it into more of this, the rising costs, shrinking margins that a lot of farms are facing currently. Pam, you approached it really well. Across the nation, but in particular, we're very familiar with Washington costs of just Washington farms been facing ridiculous costs and just rising costs in particular recent years. Kind of so one, farmers are at the mercy of the markets, and those markets are not just national but international markets that they are dependent and beholden to. But they also are seeing, so they're receiving pennies to the dollar, but we're also seeing just crazy increases in costs. Kind of walk us through, what are some of the biggest drivers that are driving costs up in Washington specifically?
I think the most significant driver of agricultural operating costs in Washington is easily labor. We pay, I believe it's 75% more than any other state in the country when it comes to labor costs. So when you look at that as the driver for what your overhead costs look like, it's pretty significant. And what that does in turn is force farms and ranches to make choices about whether or not they're going to do things like leave fruit on trees or harvest it. And when you think about that in terms of that minuscule profit margin to begin with, what you're doing is asking businesses to decide whether or not they are selling a product or leaving it behind, and making a choice about how they're going to pay bills or not pay bills for that matter. And I think that in turn contributes to that overall discussion about profitability and in the long-term viability of a farm or a ranch. And we see that across the board in Washington. It really does come back to labor, but there are other things that Washington is really expensive at as well. Whether that is looking at our regulation around L&I think is something that often gets overlooked as well. Our labor and industries insurance escalates anywhere from 6 to 12% on an annual basis, and it is mandatory, and it is a monopoly held by the state. So you cannot go out and seek private insurance for your farm or ranch somewhere else. Certainly that's something we could change. And it would make it a little bit more competitive probably and depress that cost. So, I mean, there's a long list of those kinds of things that are eating away at that income margin.
Faith, let me ask this, on those are some of the things that are specific to Washington, but are these specific to Washington? What are some of maybe the more national factors that are impacting costs farmers?
Yeah, I would highlight that most of these are things every other state is facing. Labor is astronomically high for the majority of our states. It's one of our largest farm expenses. This year, I think something good to highlight is fuel and fertilizer prices were very high due to the conflict in the Middle East. So, that was faced by all of the states, but, it hits different states harder. In Illinois, their diesel price peaked at about $5.41 a gallon, their farm diesel, which, in the West Coast, that was kind of an average, price of farm diesel pre-conflict. And so it kind of just depends. But again, the labor is something that is really hard in the United States. And I would say, talking about this whole theme of competition and how farmers get paid for their goods and their crops, that makes it really hard to compete when, we're importing other goods. So like for specialty crops, so which is basically all fruits and vegetables. So like if we're importing strawberries and Mexico has a lower labor cost, it's hard to compete on price when we're paying so much more for labor.
Well, I have a couple questions, but I do want to, at this point, just let the viewers, individuals that are watching this, know that as this conversation is continuing, if you do have any questions for Dr. Parham or Pam, please use the comment section in whatever platform you're watching this on, and you can ask questions there. We will keep the conversation going, but I do want to open that up to those that are watching. If you do have any questions for this panel, please take advantage of that. Use the comment section, and we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. So anyway, just wanted to make that quick little plug. So basically what I'm, there, we do see farms that are facing these crazy, ridiculous rising costs, both on an international scale as here on a statewide level, that, our state legislators or leaders, do have influence and authority and oversight too. But there are other things on a national scale, even internationally, that that farmers are having to pay the price literally for. What does, I guess my question, I'm trying to kind of frame this question. I don't want to be doom and gloom, but when farmers don't have the authority to go out and raise the prices because they are, being hit with higher costs, labor, trade, water, et cetera, insurance, et cetera. Sometimes, a lot of times, we're seeing farms are facing, negative returns. I know we just saw data coming out that the farm profitability here in Washington was, we were 50th in the nation when it comes to the profitability return to farms. We're in the red, we're in the negative. What does a negative margin year look like and kind of mean for a farm? Pam, I'll start with you, but welcome Dr. Parham's perspective on this as well. Kind of help break that down for someone who isn't maybe living that day to day. How can we better understand that?
I think what it really does is forces you to restructure how you are operating. It pushes off improvements to equipment. It pushes off improvements to land management. Perhaps you were thinking about improving or implementing some sort of overhead irrigation system. You're not doing that. You are not buying new equipment that is more fuel efficient and has lower emissions because you can't afford it. You are potentially restructuring your operating loan with your financial institution. You are potentially laying off longtime workers at your discretion based on whether or not you have the income to pay them. You are potentially truncating your crops based on your ability to grow something versus not this other thing, it has a ripple effect in the community as well. So what a lot of data shows and a lot of research shows is that as farms collapse in rural communities in particular, the businesses that rely on them collapse as well. So you see, local restaurants, parts stores, even grocery stores, and those kinds of things. As farms melt away, so too do all of those ancillary community businesses that rely on the income from those farms. So when you have these negative operating years year over year, it in turn sort of erodes the entire community that is relying upon them.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe from a economist perspective as well, what is the impact when a farm has that negative margin for a year, maybe even year after year? What is the effect? What's the stake there?
Yeah, I think Pam put it very well, right? You reduce expenses. You maybe can't hire as many folks. Maybe you mow down some acreage and decide just not to plant there because it's way more expensive to plant than it is to grow that food. And so those are all very devastating decisions. And I think, just in the vein of saving family farming, it doesn't really encourage young folks to come back when we see negative years after year after year. It's one thing for a farmer to experience one year where they don't do so well, but when you're going on multi-years of negative returns, how do you pass that farm on to the next generation? It becomes very difficult, for kids to come back and grandkids to come back, or young folks who weren't in farming to begin with to decide to buy a family farm and start one.
You're absolutely right. And again, I've heard it before, and I guess I want to share this for viewers in particular. Again, those who may not be in farming. I've heard more than once, and the older generation telling their kid, don't go into farming. I want you to pick a career that is somewhere else, not in farming, because this is driving me, it's not too hard, but it's just not sustainable. This is, I want something better for you. And that is a devastating reality when, as someone who appreciated eating breakfast this morning, who is very dependent on individuals raising food and producing that food that I can go to the grocery store and purchase, to hear that we are making it so difficult for farmers that they are now saying, I wouldn't wish this on my kids or my grandkids in some respects. That should hopefully be a wake-up call to people that something needs to change. This is not sustainable if we're, in essence, figuratively, if not even literally, killing people, for farming and raising our food. So
Right. And just to, tag on to that, it's another cliche we say in the ag industry, but food security is national security. So if all these farms close, if we lose a lot of farmland to urban development and things like that, what happens if there is a conflict and we need our own food supply? So continuing to think about what is the long-term, like the best health for our national security, and making sure food security is on the top of that is a really important part.
You're absolutely right. And I know I've heard a number of times, we are now a net importer of our food, as opposed to, at the very least, Washington, as opposed to an exporter. We are now more reliant than ever on other countries feeding us and providing for us than ever before. And again, that should be another point to just, rattle people a little bit and say, hey, is this how I want to, keep moving forward? Are we trending in that right direction where we're raising prices? The return to farmers is decreasing. They're not able to grow as much. They're not able to invest in the economy as much. And we're looking at the future of farming as kind of bleak in some respects. And so hopefully, you would hope that would change. Let me kind of shift a little bit. This has been incredibly helpful for me personally, just kind of understanding a little bit better how food markets work. again, heavy accent on markets and kind of understanding that this is not necessarily in the farmer's hands to, demand what price they receive. What are some of the maybe misconceptions that you have seen from your perspective that consumers may have about food markets, how food markets operate? Again, this idea that I've seen, when the cost of groceries is going up, there's the assumption that farmers must be making more money. And again, you've really helped kind of break that misconception down, and that I can't take that for granted. What are some of the other maybe misconceptions around food prices that, or how, commodity prices operate that you've run into? Dr. Parham, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think that's the largest one, right? That if you're paying more in the grocery store, that must mean the farmer is doing well. And we just know that's not correct. What you're paying at the grocery store is not the same as what the grocery store paid for it, and it's not the same as what the packer paid for it, and it's not the same as what the farmer got paid for it. So there is that level, and a lot of that profit is in the middle stage, and not necessarily from that farm gate value. And so I think that's one of the biggest ones. And just continuing to highlight that we're in a multi-year downturn of a farm economy. We haven't had one bad year. A lot of farmers across the country are going on 3 or 4 bad years, and that's really hard to sustain.
All right. Let's see. I think we can. I'll turn it over to Pam here in a second. I so we got a comment here from Jet that this sounds incredibly scary for farmers and ranchers. Why would anyone want to become a farmer right now? That is kind of to the point that we were sharing, and that is a very devastating reality when agriculture is something that we so desperately need, so vitally. And Pam, let me turn it to you real quick. I saw I think Dylan is in the background working on some of the audio. If I can get Pam unmuted real fast. There we go. Pam, let me turn it to you. What are some of the misconceptions that you've run into or seen, maybe we haven't quite explored yet?
I think one of the big misconceptions is actually connected to Jet's question, that why would you want to be a farmer right now with everything that's going on? I think that farmers do these things that we do because we love it. I don't think anybody goes into farming thinking that they're going to become a millionaire, or that it's not going to be hard, because most people who farm do so generationally. There are, the number of first-time farmers is slim, and I think that's where we need to be focusing our efforts, is figuring out how to inspire more people to go into farming, not less. And I realize I'm saying that as a fourth-generation farmer, but I do think that there is you have to sort of have some optimism in your heart if you're a farmer, because at the end of the day, you're putting a seed in the ground, or you're breeding a cow or some other livestock, and then you wait and you become a steward of that animal or of the land, and hope that all of your stewardship and all of your hard work and all of your effort produce something that feels borderline magical at the end of it, whether it's a baby animal or a crop. And if it does, you've done something miraculous. So even though all of this sounds very gloomy, there is always this moment. We just had a bean crop come out of the ground, and it is never not exciting to see beans pop out of the ground. And I was, little kid at Christmas time, excited to see all the baby beans breaking through the surface. So there's these little glimmers that just make you really happy as a farmer too. And I think that's something that can sometimes get lost in this discussion. That all of this is doom and gloom, but it really isn't. You know, you have these moments along the way that make it feel good and worth it and worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah. That's actually a fantastic example, and just I can really appreciate the, something that Safe Family Farming, one of our goals is really how do we highlight, some of the issues or challenges or concerns. And it can be very easy to fall into the, just this, oh, the sky is falling, and oh, this is so hard, and this is, we're very doom and gloom. And really that isn't necessary, doesn't have to be the case. It is very hard, but it is very rewarding work. And being a farmer, and raising animals, and producing food that sustains your community, the community that you've chosen to plant yourself in, to live within, and to live around. That is a very rewarding and worthwhile occupation and way to spend your life. So there's nothing but respect and appreciation for those in agriculture. And the goal really is, how do we help those who don't live within, a more rural or agricultural community, have a better understanding or appreciation for, one, the challenges that farmers are facing, but also just the beauty and the reward that is also part of that occupation and way of life in so many ways. Well, let me, one of the things that I guess we're we're working on at Safe Family Farming, I mentioned, historically or in the past, we really have focused a lot on the challenges, the kind of pressures, some of the negative issues or challenges that agriculture is facing. And it can come off, very negative focus. But I'd love to, we're really kind of going to start moving forward, talking about what are solutions that we can be about promoting. Not just, hey, things are really hard right now, and we're just kind of coming off complaining and whining. But how can we move that beyond, acknowledging the difficulties and the struggles, to saying, and let's now work, activistically, and take more of an offensive approach to be proactive in pursuing solutions. So one, we've talked a little bit about kind of what's at stake as farms are receiving less money, or receiving a small amount of money for every dollar spent at the grocery store that a consumer may spend. Plus, you tack on the rising costs of labor and trade and tariffs and things that we're facing here, as well as just the costs of doing business in Washington. What are maybe some solutions? Pam, you hinted at it a little bit, or not even really hinted, you gave an example of one or two, but I'm encouraging to be a little more explicit. What are maybe a solution both at the state level that maybe we could look at? And then, Dr. Parham, I'll look to you for more on the national side. What are some solutions that farmers can be advocates for, that farming organizations such as, Washington Policy Center or Safe Family Farming or others that are around the state can be advocating for, as well as, maybe some that policymakers, legislators, both, state legislators as well as some of our federal legislators can be, considering and looking at. Pam, you kicked it off, so I'll start with you. But what are some solutions that we might be able to kind of look at, or might be worth exploring?
I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the Climate Commitment Act on this show. So I would love to see the Climate Commitment Act, if not repealed in full, which would be fantastic, at least a real workable ag solution found for it, because farmers are paying a fuel tax that they were never intended to pay. Still, I would love to see a repeal of the farm equipment sales tax in Washington. I'd love to see the monopoly on L&I addressed in some way. I'd really like to see a change to our ag overtime law, so that it is something that's fair and addresses the needs of everyone, and that includes our farm workers, who have repeatedly said time and again that they don't like it, and that it's taking income out of their pockets. And I would really like to see our ag community have a seat at every single table where the discussion involves their ability to function and be viable. And I think that is something in particular in Washington that does not occur very often. More often than not, maybe we have half a chair rather than an entire sofa, which I think would be appropriate in many of those discussions. I think what that looks like to me is perhaps an expansion of Washington's right to farm law into something more along the lines of an agricultural protection law that allows us to have actual economic viability moving forward.
You're here. I would support those. Yes, that's good. Faith, how, from the more national perspective, as someone looking at this across the country, what are some solutions that agriculture or policymakers could be looking at and considering?
I think my biggest advice is to talk to your lawmakers, both in your state house, but also nationally, and let them know these issues. There are ways that the federal government can help, pass laws and change statutes and regulations to make farming more viable for everyone. I think that we've gotten a lot of great examples already, but different things like how do we change the guest worker programs to be more workable? How do we make that more stable so it's not being changed every 4 years if there's a new administration with different goals? And so, really asking Congress to, come to work and figure out ways that they can make that a sustainable piece and give farmers that stability. Right now, we're really looking at the Farm Bill. It's been a long time since we've had a 5-year farm bill, even though they're supposed to be passed every 5 years. We had a lot of those pieces fixed through reconciliation last summer, but there's a lot of the farm bill that needs to get done. So talking to your lawmakers about passing a farm bill, getting it through the Senate, and then onto the president's desk to sign. So those are all ways we give those farmers and ranchers stability to continue to operate. And so, just talking to your lawmakers and letting them know, even if you're not in farming, if you hear of an idea you think is not good for farmers and ranchers, they want to hear from you as well.
Yeah. No, that's very helpful and encouraging just to kind of hear. Let me just kind of, as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything from your perspective, we talked about misconceptions that non-farmer or consumers may have that aren't in the living this. Maybe as to just kind of wrap up, what is one thing that you would want a non-farmer, a consumer, someone who's not working in agriculture day in day out, or in kind of one of these secondary operations like Farm Bureau or Safe Family Farming or Washington Policy Center even, what would you want to communicate, or what would be wise for a non-farming urban suburban consumer to be aware of, and just kind of have in the back of their mind when they're going to the grocery store or when they are interacting with the food that they're eating? What would be good for them to understand about that food? Faith, let me start with you.
Yeah, I would just, kind of harken back to that food security as a national security piece of we need to make sure that we have family farms in the United States and we have agriculture in the United States that can keep us, safe for generations to come with an affordable and abundant food supply. We talk about food a lot, but farmers also, clothe you. There's a lot of natural textiles that go into clothing. So, making sure that that is an option in the United States, and also for fuel as we increasingly start to use biofuels for, different climate agendas and things like that. Those are coming from agricultural feedstocks as well. So, farmers are really ingrained in your life. And if they close and those farm gates close forever, what's next? And so really making sure that people understand that it's not just your food, but it's your clothes and it's the fuel in your car. Farming touches all parts of our life.
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And no, I couldn't agree more, and really appreciate that. Pam, how about yourself? What is something that from your perspective, it would be very helpful for the consumers in our state to understand about where their food comes from?
I think what I would ask everyone to keep in mind is that even people who are consumers are part of the agricultural process. So I like to start any public speaking I go to. I ask everyone if they've eaten that day. And if they have, please raise their hands. And I remind them that they are also part of the ag community because they ate that day. And I think it's really important to remind folks that whether you're a consumer or a food producer or somewhere in between, every single person is part of the agricultural food supply chain because we need each other. My farm doesn't exist without consumers. Consumers don't exist without my farm or any of the other farms in Washington or anywhere else. So we need one another, and it's really incumbent upon all of us to rely on one another for each part of the supply chain to be successful. And I think it's critical that we learn from one another. Don't Google. My email is readily available on the internet. Shoot me an email if you have questions about anything food related, or find another farmer. Email Ben. Email anyone who is more connected to agriculture than Google, because there are plenty of us who will answer any question candidly, I'm sure.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. I actually love that perspective, and it's nice to feel like I'm part of the agriculture community as well, because yes, I had breakfast this morning, and I'm very grateful for someone else growing that and raising that egg or that sausage. Absolutely. And so that I really like that interconnected mindset that one can't exist without the other. Just raises the importance, I guess, of both and the value of both. But with that, we are running out of time. But both of you, thank you so much. Dr. Parham, Pam, thank you both for your voice, for your leadership, for your work in the various organizations and the food that you help advocate for and produce. It really does mean a lot. I really appreciate you both being a part of this conversation, and thank you to those that watch this. I did want to share just real quickly for those that may be interested. We do have a event coming up later next month that we are encouraging individuals to keep in mind as we are working and encouraging people to become more activistic and to be more of that solutions driven, solutions oriented. We are helping individuals. How do you communicate your farm story? How do you communicate to the media on the importance and value of agriculture? And instead of just encouraging people to get out there and do something, we're really working at Safe Family Farming to also train and empower and equip our individuals that are working with us to advocate and engage with the media, those that are communicating, as well as we each have, we each have social media, or we can be a media in and of ourselves. And so we do have a training coming up on July 9th and in Yakima at the County Resource Center. If you're interested, you can use that QR code or go to our website, which I will point to you right now. Our website is www.savefamilyfarming.org. Like Pam mentioned, please reach out to herself or to Dr. Parham or to the American Farm Bureau Federation. But you can also reach out to Safe Family info at safefamilyfarming.org. If you're not already on our newsletter, you can sign up, and we would greatly value that, and we'd encourage you to take part in that. But again, Faith, Pam, thank you both for your leadership. Thank you for your work, and really appreciate you taking the time with us. And with that, I will let you have the rest of the day. And thank you all for viewing this with us. Really appreciate it.